Trump, just hours ago, landed in Beijing for a 2-day summit with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping. This is Trump's first visit to China in this term, and it is the first time a U.S. president has visited China since 2017 when Trump was there. So quite a lot of eyes on this visit. It also takes place a year after very tense U.S.-China relations. We saw sparring over tariffs, which at one point got to 125%, this very intense back and forth. And China also taking strong, albeit rhetorical, positions against U.S. moves in Latin America. We've seen China condemn violations of sovereignty, but again, these have been largely rhetorical stances. And China has also been watching the U.S., Israel, and Iran very carefully, not only because Iran is a very important economic and strategic partner, but also because many in Beijing see this conflict as revealing how Washington intends to wield power globally moving forward. As we know, and as we've talked about on this show, and of course, Rania, you and your show, Dispatches, this war has also reshaped global trade, energy markets, and military priorities, which has increased fears of wider global economic crisis. And this has raised the stakes of this summit even higher. So to discuss all of this, we are very lucky to be joined by the great Ken Hammond. He's a professor of East Asian and global history at New Mexico State University. Ken, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, first off, Ken, give us kind of a broad overview of this visit. In your perspective, what does China hope to gain from the summit, and what is Trump's major goal here?
Well, who knows what Trump's major goal is? I mean, the problem, of course, one of the many problems with the Trump administration is that there's kind of no there, you know, that their policies in many areas vacillate from day to day and sometimes from hour to hour. So it's not clear that Trump has a well-formulated agenda. He obviously likes being treated like a big shot, and China, of course, is taking this relationship very, very seriously. I think he would like to gain more access to certain resources, particularly rare earth materials that China is, one of the principal sources of in the world. So I'm sure he's looking for some sort of agreement about that. There'll be a number of other items on the American agenda. The overall context, of course, is simply that the relationship between the United States and China has been fraught and dangerous for some 15 years now in its sort of new phase, that after Obama announced the so-called pivot to Asia back in 2011, the United States kind of gave up its hopes, false hopes, foolish hopes that China would somehow, as it economically developed, become more like a Western bourgeois democracy. China has clearly demonstrated that's not on the agenda over there. The Communist Party, the leadership of the party, has taken very strong stances on so many things and has devoted so much of the accumulated social wealth there to addressing poverty and healthcare and housing and the environment. China now is, of course, a world leader in combating climate change, while the United States, is hell bent for leather to accelerate climate change. So the contrast between the two countries has been stark. And since 2011, American hostility towards China has simply deepened and become stronger. But China has persevered, and China has developed, and China has achieved many, many very important things in all the areas that I just mentioned. And it may be, one can only hope, that whatever calmer heads may exist in Washington anymore, down in the depths of the State Department or wherever, they may finally be realizing that the kind of bullying and the kind of hostility and aggressiveness that the United States has deployed towards China simply isn't going to work. That the idea that somehow we are going to derail China's progress, that's just not reality. That's just not happening. There's a very interesting article in today's People's Daily by a writer named Guo Jiping, who lays out the article. It's all captured in the headline of the article, which says, US China relations cannot go back. They cannot
Mm.
continue to be the way they've been. But there is a path towards a better future. And then goes on to outline what's involved in all that. Whether Donald Trump, whether the United States political elites are in any way open to this more pragmatic, more realistic view that the interests of humanity, the interests of working people all around the planet need to be prioritized. And these two great countries, these two huge economies, need to find ways to work together rather than trying to, having the United States try to undermine China's development. Whether that's possible, it's hard to imagine given the recklessness of the Trump administration. But we'll have to see what goes on these next 2 days.
Well, while we're on this point, Ken, I want to read you some of the names and titles of some of the people that are going on this trip alongside Trump. We have Apple CEO Tim Cook, CEO of Tesla and SpaceX Elon Musk, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, BlackRock Chairman and CEO Larry Fink, Cargill Chairman and CEO Brian Sykes, GE Aerospace Chairman and CEO H. Lawrence Culp, and Goldman Sachs Chairman and CEO David Solomon. And, this is a bit of an underreported part of the trip. It's really not just about Trump and Xi, but these are some of the most rich and powerful people in the United States, top members of the ruling class who are accompanying Trump on this trip. And as you know, and I think it's kind of ironic, these are some of the same figures that fund politicians who are waging a crusade against China and say that anyone who challenges the dominant narrative about China is an agent. The United States absolutely cannot be friends with China. Yet here you have all of these CEOs going to take pictures with Xi and sign deals right out in the open. So what do you make of their participation, and what are they after going on this trip?
Well, it certainly doesn't fill one with hope that the American delegation is going to prioritize the needs of working people anywhere. So I think that, you know, this is the good old boys club to end all good old boys clubs, and it is, as you say, this is like a little micro slice at the very top of the American ruling class. And these are capitalist, imperialist goons that are just there to try to further enrich their own corporate cronies and line their own pockets. That if that doesn't send a message, I'm not sure what does. What's remarkable, I think, and we can reflect on this in various ways, is the restraint that the Chinese side shows on this. I mean, we're at the point in this relationship between the United States and China where Trump and all these billionaires are kind of going to China hat in hand. They're
Mhm.
kind of recognizing, maybe not fully yet, and maybe they're not ready to fully accept it, but recognizing at least in some way that they're going to have to get at least a little bit with the program, not the program of socialist development and poverty eradication and all the things that China dedicates its accumulating social wealth to, but that even if they want to hang on to their privileged positions, they're going to have to deal with China in some way other than just waving the finger and threatening to attack them and trying to provoke a war over Taiwan. China has accomplished just the most remarkable things, and it's in the interest not just of the Chinese people, but even of the American people around the world, for that project to continue. That doesn't seem like anything that's going to penetrate the skulls of this clutch of billionaires, but maybe there'll be some leakage in the media, and some people in the West will begin to understand that China's not a threat, China's an opportunity. And I don't mean an economic investment opportunity, I mean an opportunity for remodeling the way that a country manages its economy, its society, and its priorities.
Well, I'd also just like to point out, which is an interesting element, that the companies that do sign these agreements with China, oftentimes, like was the case with Elon Musk and Tesla, they have to, sign agreements that say they're going to promote socialist values. Yet at the same time, they are ardent and fervent anti-communists here in the United States.
Yeah, yeah.
It's super interesting. Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, it's just that you got to wonder about the cognitive dissonance that's going on in their heads.
Yeah. No, it's really incredible. It makes you wonder, are we going to see some sort of write-up from Fox News on all of these CEOs saying that they're now just like Chinese agents? Because of what I just heard, sounds, to me like that might be the case. But Ken, I do.
For sure.
Yeah, if you're watching Fox News, there's an idea for you. Ken, I do want to ask you about the Iran war angle here, because as we've mentioned, the summit is taking place with the backdrop of the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. So, what lessons is China taking away from that war? Do Chinese leaders see this as an isolated regional conflict, or do they perhaps see it as a broader American strategy aimed ultimately, some might argue, at containing bigger powers like China and Russia?
Oh, I think the Chinese are very conscious of the implications of what's happening in the Gulf, in the Strait of Hormuz, as they have been, of Israel's genocidal war in Gaza. China has taken principled positions, and as Zoe pointed out, much of this has been rhetorical, but it has also involved things like working with the Palestinian political action groups, to try and agree to a coordinated approach when, hopefully, eventually, this terrible war comes to an end, and to things like the Iranian-Saudi reconciliation, which right now doesn't seem to be going all that well. But, China has taken some practical steps in the area as well. But I think that, China's, just the articulation of those principled positions is in part underpinned by the fact that China is the largest purchaser of Iranian oil, but Iranian oil is not the largest component of China's oil supply. So this idea that somehow by going in and fighting Iran, you were going to put some chokehold on Chinese petroleum supplies, that was never a realistic proposition. So I think that Chinese are very conscious of their strategic position. They have stockpiled reserves over the last year or two, sort of in anticipation of possible problems like this. They have a very, a capacity for longer term planning that I think greatly exceeds that of the United States and indeed most Western powers. So I think that they're very conscious that the wars in the Middle East are always part of America's anti-China strategy. But, Iran's been fighting the fight. And I think that while the United States has been getting slapped around a little bit over there, maybe some lessons are penetrating at least deeper down in Washington. That not such a good idea.
You're such an optimist. You're such an optimist, Ken. You're such an optimist. That's a very
well. I just keep hoping that somewhere buried in the bowels of the State Department, there's still some expert,
Yeah, who's like, you guys. But on that note, Ken, I do want to ask. Do you think that China, if that's the case, right, the way you just broke that all down, China views as, they're not dumb. They're quite smart. The people running China to recognize that what the U.S. is doing is completely reckless, destabilizing the world economy with its ultimate aim set on China, even if in the short term this does divert U.S. military resources away from China for now. Obviously, just given what U.S. officials say and how all of this has played out, this is intended at some point to be used against China. So, right. And of course, Iran is a very close ally of China. So did China perhaps miss an opportunity here to leverage their visit to maybe try to force a push for an end to this war? And, I'm saying that in the sense also that we can't deny there has been a lot of friendly criticism, I would say, towards the fact that, there's a feeling, especially in the region, which, where I'm speaking, the region of the Middle East, of West Asia, that why isn't China doing more? So yeah, I'm just curious, is there a missed opportunity here?
Yeah, well, I think that many of us, myself included, are concerned, I suppose I would say, about why China isn't perhaps doing a bit more. But I also think that we don't know out here in the real world. We don't know what's being talked about. And I think one thing that's important to bear in mind right in these next couple days is that while Trump is in Beijing, meeting with Xi Jinping and all these billionaires are in his train and all this stuff, the talks that may actually be more substantive are taking place over in South Korea between Chinese delegates and Scott Bessent from the Treasury and all that. And I think that's where whatever leverage China may feel it has will probably be applied. I think that, the United States is fairly desperate for greater access to some of these rare earth materials and to other advanced technologies. China is now in the lead in many areas of technological development beyond the United States. And I think that gaining access to some of that knowledge, maybe that's also something that China can really work with. So whether they're prepared to tie that not just to their own access to Western technologies and materials, but to tie it to something like the situation in Iran, it may be a little easier for the United States to open up to some sort of face-saving gesture to get out of that war because it's going so badly for the United States. But again, these things, these conversations are taking place away from the cameras and the microphones and all that. All we can do is we'll see what sort of communique comes out of the meetings in Beijing, but more importantly, we'll see what happens on the ground over the next few months going forward.
Yeah, we'll definitely be circling back to you to get your thoughts on how the summit went and all of these other kind of parallel meetings that are taking place. But before we let you go, as we said, the Iran war has really kind of thrown the entire globe into a new context. We mentioned earlier the crisis, the global economic crisis affecting South Asia, Southeast Asia. It is really the Strait of Hormuz has revealed how fragile the global economy really is. And it seems that, as Trump said himself, he's willing to risk enormous economic fallout rather than, reach a compromise with Iran. How does China view this level of recklessness? Is there, a shift in how they read, exactly how far the U.S. will go to achieve its interests?
Well, yes, I do think there's been a deepening concern in policy circles in Beijing. Certainly, if what's reflected in Chinese publications, things like the party's ideological journal, Choushi, and the columns in the People's Daily and things like that. There's a lot of very serious, how shall we say, contemplation of just exactly how out of control the United States is. I think that the United States is increasingly perceived as a kind of almost like a wounded animal, and China wants to be very cautious in dealing with that. I mean, in terms of what can be done with the United States, obviously, as we all know, it's a big problem. Getting this behemoth to change direction, getting these maniacs running the military and the government now, getting them to change course. This is a monstrous project, and for China, which has to work at arm's length, to say the least, I'm sure that they're trying to figure out what levers they have to manipulate,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not a simple thing. The Trump administration does not appear to be susceptible to many of the historically normative means of diplomatic interaction or the application of international law. Basically, I mean, we saw the clip just a few minutes ago about Trump saying he doesn't care about the financial conditions of the American people. He doesn't care about the conditions of anybody other than his coterie, his cronies, and they're doing great, but. How far they're willing to go in terms of wrecking the whole assembly, I think is very unpredictable. And China is trying to proceed firmly but cautiously within that framework. And if anybody can assert any influence, it's probably going to be the Chinese. I mean, talking about Macron and his posturing in Nairobi, the French ruling elites, they love to tout their independence from Washington, but the minute that Trump puts the hammer down, they're falling into line. So if anybody can do it, it would be the United States. But I just don't see, as reflected in the composition of his entourage, I just don't see the United States yet as really prepared to change course. So we'll see what comes out of this. I don't think anybody is anticipating great breakthroughs, but it is a moment where maybe there'll be a little give, and we can, I've already been accused of being an optimist, so maybe I'll indulge that just a little further.
Well, as Gramsci said, optimism of the spirit, pessimism of the intellect.
Yes, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Yeah,
exactly. Well, Dr. Ken Hammond, thank you so much for joining us for that excellent breakdown. We'll definitely be watching over the next day what happens in this summit and how that impacts us and the world.
For sure. Thanks for having me here. It's always good to see the two of you.